This is the sermon for June 27th, 2021, and I'm going to touch on all 12 steps to a compassionate life. First, to read from Mark 6:30 through 34. The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in a boat to a deserted place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they hurried there on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. As Jesus went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. Well, I have two brief thoughts. One is from Louis L'Amour, the novelist that wrote about the West. One day I was speeding along at the typewriter, and my daughter, who was a child at the time, said, "Daddy, why are you writing so fast?" I told her, "Because I want to see how the story turns out." And then another story shared is this. My father-in-law was an avid knitter, and one day I saw him knitting away as fast as he could. When I asked him why, he responded, "I'm short on this yarn, and I want to finish this sweater before the yarn runs out." Well, we might want to hurry to accomplish all 12 steps to a compassionate life. In reality, it's a lifelong process. We don't need to be in a hurry, as long as we're taking steps along the path. So the first 6 steps: 1, learn about compassion. 2, look at your own world. 3, compassion for yourself. 4, empathy. 5, mindfulness. 6, take action. And then last week I talked about 7, 8, and 9. 7 is how little we know. Having uncertainty, knowing we might be wrong about something, not trying to win every argument. This is compassion. 8, how should we speak to one another? If you use that tone with someone, that tone, then it's not very compassionate. Don't take that tone with me, we hear. And we remember that God never uses that tone, a judgmental tone, with us, no matter what we ask for or how we ask. And 9, concern for everybody, especially those who are different from us. It's easy to have concern for the people who are like us, or easier to have concern. But how many times throughout history have we changed our minds about a people or an issue? How many of those times that in the before they were positive they had God on their side, and afterward they thought, I guess I changed my mind, so I guess God wasn't on my side for that. And now steps 10 and 11 and 12. Step 10 is knowledge plus experience. Step 11 is recognition, not looking away. And step 12 is love your enemies. So let's go into each one. Step 10. It's one thing to learn the rules of a game. That would be intellectual knowledge. It's another thing to play the game. It's one thing to read a book about a foreign culture. It's another thing to have a friend from that foreign culture. It's the experience that we're looking for. It's one thing to hear about God. It's another thing to experience God for yourself. When I was in high school, my brother came home from a canoe trip to the Boundary Waters in Canada, Quetico, Canada. And the tree was hit by a lightning, that his tree was sitting on top of the roots of the tree. The charge traveled down the tree, and he was lifted off the ground in the middle of the night, sleeping. And he came home curious about God. And so he and I talked. He's allergic to people who are overly enthusiastic about God. And I say, and a mile wide and an inch deep comes from that kind of curiosity. And so I tend to be allergic to that too, because I don't see that it comes out with fruit. I see that it's lots of words without the fruit. My brother and I both are moving toward a deeper faith as we move toward retirement. Still waters run deep, that kind of faith. And we don't talk about it all the time. We're looking to live it rather than talk about it quite so much. Both are needed, of course. So that's step 10. So when it comes to learning compassion, you want more than intellectual knowledge. I've asked you to consider these 12 steps, and we want more than knowledge, intellectual knowledge. We want experience. So that's why we can live with these steps for a while. Just choose one and live with it for a while. We want the warmth of experience, firsthand knowledge. Takes lots of practice, including trial and error. We need to be able to look foolish in order to get that deeper knowledge. And of course, we're still practicing compassion for ourselves as we try it out in new ways. Compassion is a deeply complex and involved concept, so we need to live it out. How many of you love being a beginner at something? I find it difficult. We don't want to be a beginner. Have you ever tried to learn a musical instrument as an adult? It's hard to be a beginner. It takes humility. So we don't want just we don't want just intellectual knowledge. We want first-hand knowledge. Somebody said once there are no second-hand Christians, only first-hand Christians. All right, so now step 11. Step 11 is difficult. It's don't look away. It's one thing to keep a safe distance from those we care about, from those we offer compassion to. It's another thing to step into their living room, to step into their experience of life. These days, with the media everywhere, we might be aware constantly of the suffering of others all around the world, and we might feel burnout or compassion fatigue when it comes to this. If we see it on TV, remember TV, if it bleeds, it leads. So become aware of how you can't take on the world's suffering all at once. Instead, we start with people around us. We start with people who are hurting. And so food pantries around here are an important part of how we reach out to those nearby. And of course, through the United Methodist Church, we reach out in all kinds of ways. We especially in our area don't want children to go hungry because it affects their learning, and their learning affects their whole lives. There's a lot of ways to help, and people do fall through the cracks. And so finding our way into looking and not looking away is an important part of compassion. And of course, the last of the 12 steps is by far and away the hardest. Love your enemies. That's step 12. Where have we heard that before? Love your enemies. I always think it's a challenge that calls me up short. After all, most people would think the idea is foolish or stupid. They are your enemies for a reason, and you have a right to hate them. They've hurt you, and so you have a right to hate them. What are some concrete ways that you can love an enemy? I've been reading this week about how we can become aware of the parts that are not me, the parts that we reject as part of ourselves. The qualities that an enemy has are the parts of ourselves that we have rejected and that we want to strong arm away, not me, not me. And if we figure out what those are and figure out, maybe they're part of me, because being human involves having everything part of us. Can you define an enemy as someone who gets on your nerves? As someone who causes pain to those we love? Is an enemy someone that we judge harshly? In fact, we would use that tone with them. What about the people who don't seem to lift a finger to learn compassion toward me? What about people who judge me harshly? They're enemies for a reason. So how does one properly love their enemies? I still struggle with wanting to learn to love an enemy. That's where we turn to grace, and we know that we are all in the pain together, and when people act in a mean way, it's out of hurt. And what do we all share? We share being hurt. We share having hurt within us. Like Thomas says, help my unbelief. I believe, help my unbelief. I want to receive grace, but I don't care to give it. I'm still in Compassion 101 myself. I know this when I realize that I don't love my enemies and I don't want to learn, not unless they fess up to how they've wronged me. Now, forgiving and loving others does not mean you give them permission to continue to harm you. No, we move away in the sense of protecting our tender selves, but we love them from a safe distance. And of course, that's an unusual situation. People are not doormats. And when a man batters a woman, she needs to get to safety. She needs to work on finding community and emotional healing, empowerment, and then to eventually love and forgive the man from a safe distance for her own sake as much as for him. We serve a loving God who does not want to see anyone abused from the top of a power structure. That's why it's always good to look at the systems of power and the patterns of abuse and to call them what they are. God is a God of justice, looking out for those who get a raw deal in society. So we can love our enemies, but it doesn't mean continue to be abused. But in every way, we have to find ways, especially when the power differential is not great, and we know that we share the same humanity, the same hurt, to reach out where we can. So Jesus calls us to compassion and all of these things. Amen.